Welcome to the Strap and Link podcast, where we cover brands from their inception to their latest release.
It's the Montrose Tudor.
Like I said, better movement, spring drive
So,
potentially, Rolex Oyster Perpetual.
There's Super Ocean here. Now you see this kind of renaissance of Tudor. Finally, in 2016, they achieved the spring drive with an 8-day power. The podcast for watch lovers by watch lovers. New episodes every first and third Monday of the month.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Strap and Link podcast. Brett and David here, as always, with you again today. And today is a very fun episode.
Bonus episode.
Yeah, a little bonus episode, a little third episode in your April lineup from us over at Strap and Link. And of course, that is because Watches and Wonders has basically concluded at this point. So we are recording on Thursday, April the 11th in the afternoon. So again, most things have already kind of wrapped up, and David and I wanted to just quickly hop on the mic right now and spend, 10, 15, 20 minutes talking about some of our, kind of initial takes and reactions to the Tudor and the Rolex releases. And then we are going to pause for a break, and we'll be right back after that with some other brands. So with all of that being said, David, you and I, we got into not like a heated debate or anything like that, but we did get into a pretty lengthy, kind of text chain yesterday after the dust had kind of settled from day one with the Rolex and Tudor releases. So, is there a particular place that you want to start, or do you want to start with like a particular model and just kind of do that?
Well,
How do you want to kind of format this today?
Well, I mean, let's start from the beginning, and I'll just kind of lay it out. I mean, most people, I think, agree, and I say that because a lot of the times we've seen it on our DMs from posts or stories that we've shared about you guys agreeing. But obviously, Rolex came out with a lot of new lineups, as they always do. They discontinued a few notable pieces. The Le Mans, Daytona, they discontinued. I know they took away the palm dial day dates, which was pretty interesting. And but they also came out with a bunch of new pieces, and the whole world had been begging for two things, in my opinion, at least our world. Two things from Rolex this year: do not discontinue the Pepsi, and please come out with the Coke. And so you get 50, you're betting 500. The Pepsi made its way and continues on, and the rumors are dispelled until probably 3 months down the line that it'll be next year that they discontinue it. But they did not come out with the Coke. They really didn't come out with a whole bunch of everyday man, I guess you could say, watches, and which, I mean, again, Rolex is an everyday man's watch, but not a lot of stainless designs out there that came last year. I know they caught a lot of flack for the celebration dial, the emoji watch, to each their own on that. But I mean, at the grand scheme of things, that was pretty much a pretty affordable watch that Rolex came out with. If you're buying it straight from the dealer, obviously we know how expensive they are in the aftermarket, but $6 to 10 grand, somewhere in there.
Oh, you're talking about, sorry, the celebration dial, not the emoji.
Yeah,
celebration OP.
dial. Yeah. And they came out with that. Obviously, they came out with the GMT and a few other things. But this year, to me, it really just seemed like they came out with a bunch of expensive watches, which, again, I understand there's a market for that. And maybe they're trying to dispel, hey, there's so much want and so many people are throwing their name in for all these new watches. Let's make a lot of watches that a lot of people can't afford. And there won't be as many, as long of a wait list. But I thought it was very interesting that they really dove deep into that side of things. And then Tudor, on the other hand, said, okay, well, let's take advantage of this and dive deep on the copying of Rolex side of things, which, again, I think me and Brett are, we kind of differ on that, but I think we also agree to some extent. But I just thought it's very interesting that I don't know if that was meant to happen by Rolex. Rolex told Tudor, hey, you're coming out with the Coke. Everybody wants the Coke. You're going to come out with it because we're sticking with our gold pieces, and we'll come out with the one new GMT, which, again, is a beautiful GMT. It's not very original. But it literally looks like their old GMT that had the black dial, black bezel, and then with that green GMT hour hand. But instead of the full black bezel, go ahead.
So let's talk about that one real quick, because I kind of want to take a stab at some of these kind of, watch by watch. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on them. We're not going to run through specs or anything like that. But the Rolex GMT that came out, people are dubbing it the Bruce Wayne I guess was there a nickname to
Which is
that
what
one that used to exist?
I dubbed last year's. I said, "That looks like the Dark Knight watch," but everybody went with the
Just about
Guinness,
the
and now
gold
it's
one.
funny. Yeah, and
Yeah.
now they're saying, "Okay, this is the new Dark Knight," the Bruce Wayne watch,
Yeah, which
which
I
yeah,
don't even get that because Batman doesn't have green anywhere.
yeah.
So I don't really understand that, but it's a very like that particular GMT. I don't it doesn't do anything for me. And I love GMT Masters. Like I really, really do, but it is
It's a
it's just so
bland yeah,
muted. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. It's very bland and it's so muted that,
yeah.
you know, I mean, to me, it just makes the Batman and the Pepsi look that much better. So
Mhm.
it's like kind of just releasing a new model just for the sake of releasing it, you know. And we did talk recently on the Rolex GMT Master episode about this similar model that used to exist with the all black bezel and the
Yeah.
green GMT hand with the green font.
It's like
So,
they took that away and replaced it with this, which, okay, that's fine, but you
yep.
need to come out with this can't be, "Hey, this is our GMT of the year," because it's just it doesn't live up to the hype.
Yeah, yeah. So I thought that that was kind of strange. Again, to that point exactly. It looks so similar to what we had. Um, so yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with that. In terms of Tudor, let's kind of like ping pong it back a little bit here. In terms of
Mhm.
Tudor and their new GMT or the new Black Bay GMT that came with the black and the red bezel and the Black Bay 58 kind of case and configuration. So it's 39 millimeter. And this one does have a master chronometer. So it gets that new caliber that went into the Black Bay 54 and a few other
Mhm.
models from last year. So it does get the enhanced in house Tudor caliber. So that's cool. And like we said at the top of the show, going back to the archives, they pulled out one of the old Rolex GMT references. So is it the 6402? I think I'm trying to think that reference number off the top of my head. So what are your thoughts on that particular model or any kind of a comparison, any sort of, thing there? My very
Yeah.
quick first reaction is just that like that's the watch that people wanted from Rolex,
Yeah.
you know?
It's interesting that it seems like they're listening more than Rolex is. And I know
Mhm.
you mentioned, well, maybe it's just Rolex, pushing it. Hey, we're diving deep into what we're going into, and you can take over this side of the market, which sure. And I understand that, but there's still, and this is where I think me and Brett started, texting about it yesterday. So we'll just continue the conversation. There's still a lot of people out there in the world that won't buy a Tudor because of the name. And I've spoken to two since Monday. I'd be buying a Rolex Pepsi if they redid it, but I'm not buying a Tudor. I have four Rolexes. I have the Rolex. I'm not gonna buy a Tudor Coke. So why, so it's just lost market opportunity. But I understand from Tudor's standpoint where there's a lot more people that would buy a Tudor, and so they're gonna take advantage of it. So it's really just a loss for Rolex and it's a gain for Tudor in the short term. To me, again, I just Tudor needs to really be careful. And last year, I felt like they threaded the line pretty well, but they need to really be careful when it comes to the copying of just watches and just diving strictly into that, saying, "Hey, they came out with the monochrome this year as well that looks identical to the Submariner." Obviously, they've skirted back and forth with the gilded. This is the old Submariner look, and then what they came out with last year with the gilded dial, but the white and silver, bezel on the numbering there, and they kind of flirted with the copying. But this year, I feel like they really dove into it with the monochrome, and and then of course with the Coke, I think they're really jumping into the copying side of things, which to me, you're just really living up to the discriminatory words that are always said about Tudor. Hey, the poor man's Rolex. This is just a cheaper version of the Rolex, which I get it. The quality is still there, but when it comes to the world opinion, you're just really living up to that hype, which is interesting because I feel like Tudor's always tried to separate themselves from Rolex.
Yeah.
Like, hey, we have a few things here that look like it, but we have 60% or 70% of what we come out with is original. And
Right.
now I feel like that's flipped to where, hey, 80% is copying Rolex, and then we'll release one or two pieces maybe a year that are original.
Yeah. Yeah, and we had, a pretty lengthy conversation about that. I don't know if Rolex are the ones that are, telling Tudor, hey, we want you guys to make this GMT. I don't know the level of autonomy that Tudor have. Maybe this is common knowledge and we just haven't researched it. So if it's out there, please feel free to DM us and just let us know. I would really be curious to know and interested to know that. So that was what David and I talked about. I think like David just said, his sort of opinion is that of Tudor kind of copying, and my kind of retort to that was, well, I don't necessarily think, obviously I don't know, but my guess would be that they're not copying, but that there is some kind of ebb and flow from the two brands where it's sort of understood that Tudor are going to be taking the approach, like David said, you guys take this market, we potentially are going to start looking more up market. Hence the flurry of gold freaking watches that came out. I mean, that gold deep sea is probably the heaviest watch that's been released in 15 years. So it's really interesting. And the poor man's Rolex thing, we also talked about that, and I was like, well, my point to that was just simply that Wilsdorf made Tudor exactly for that. He made a second brand
Yeah.
for people that couldn't afford, or maybe back then I don't think that the cost discrepancy was nearly as high as it is today, and certainly the availability was not. So that initial sort of reasoning, I think, was twofold. It was A, yes, of course, the cost, but then B, it was, I think, like the robustness. I think some people back then, they didn't necessarily need all of the bells and whistles and the capabilities and the specs that came with a Rolex. And so Tudor was a way to get something a little similar for a good bit cheaper.
Yeah.
And so now I kind of look at it, and that's that, like, I can't help but think that is purposefully being done today, because again, we saw the GMT that we touched on, the Bruce Wayne or whatever the hell that's going to be called. And aside from that, in terms of sports watches, everything else is gold. And I don't dislike gold, but as a consumer, I see that and I just say, these are watches I'll never be able to own. I don't think that financially, I mean, I hope that I will be one day, but I don't think that financially I'll ever be able to afford a $40,000 Rolex. It's 40K at retail. Who knows what they're going to be aftermarket. I know sometimes the aftermarket, yellow and white gold, they don't necessarily increase the way that a GMT-Master does, for example. But that was just my point. And as a result, I told David the same thing. I said, this just makes me want to go get another Tudor, because like we said, it's the watch that I think a lot of people wanted, was that Coke GMT. It's been updated and upgraded, and it's cheaper. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're probably going to have to wait for a few months, but you're not going to have to wait for a year or two like you would a GMT-Master. So it's a very peculiar situation. Again, I would be very interested if anyone knows like the level of autonomy that Tudor have there, because I really don't feel like every year they're just showing up to Watches and Wonders and they're like, gotcha, bitch. We ripped off another one of your designs. But yes,
Yeah.
the monochrome, Black Bay 58, I mean, that is the all black sub, no date. The new
Yeah.
GMT, that's an old, GMT-Master reference. Are they amazing? Both the sub and the Tudor versions? Yeah, I would say all four of those watches are amazing. But it does leave something for, I think, that, maybe that upper echelon Rolex client that, maybe they don't want to go back down market. Like David said, people that they just simply won't buy it because it says Tudor. So
Yeah.
yeah, I don't
I
know.
mean, when you have Rolexes, you have a sub, you have a GMT, let's say, and then you've always wanted a Coke that's been on the list of something I want. You're not going to change that and go buy a Tudor Coke. In my opinion, you're going to stick and say, okay, well, I'll just have to buy an old Coke, an older one, or buy something new. I mean, somebody I was talking to the other day he was waiting for Watches and Wonders because he was trying to decide between a Coke or the GMT that released last year, the Guinness, and he, after talking to him, said, well, I guess I'm going with the Guinness because I was hoping the Coke would come out this year. There were a lot of people that were sitting there waiting on Rolex, hoping that they would come out with a new updated version of the Coke,
Mm-hmm.
and they just didn't. So, I mean, you're losing out a lot on that market, and Tudor's, taking advantage of that right now. Rolex, another thing that was very interesting to me was them coming out with all the Daytonas that had diamond bezels. They took
Yes.
what a lot of people hated, that they're, I mean, that's just turning a quote unquote field tool watch into just a show watch, and
And a very
taking away the
iconic
tag
one at
retirement.
that.
Yeah, yeah, oh
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean,
And it,
that's a Rolex staple, the
yeah.
Daytona,
And
and
and all of them had diamond, but it wasn't like,
yeah,
okay, here's one, here's our blinged out version. They came out 4 or 5 different types of Daytonas that had that. And I mean, Rolex, in my opinion, I'm trying to think of good watches that were released this year. The GMT was a good watch. I mean, yes, it was bland, but
yeah,
it is mass appealing. It will be successful.
yep,
The 1908 Platinum, I think, is very hit or miss, but I think in the grand scheme of things, it'll be as successful as the 1908 that came out last year. I mean, I don't hate the watch. It's interesting looking. It's just a ice blue looking 1908,
yeah,
but I think
it's
still be a
beautiful,
successful
but
watch.
yeah,
The obviously I think the deep sea gold blue bezel blue dial, I think that will be as successful as their same version of that, but in the sub. Not a lot of people want it. If you're going with a solid gold watch, a lot of people will go with a day date before they'll go with a solid gold sub or deep sea.
or Sky
So
Dweller or something
yeah,
like that, maybe.
so I don't think it'll be knocking the door down, but I mean it's interesting, and it's the first time Deep Sea really came out on their own here. Hey, we're not a version of Submariner, just a deeper version. We're really coming out here, and I think it was interesting, and definitely a show stiller. Still, my favorite watch of the whole release is that smoke dial day date president with her Everrose gold.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
is
it's
still the
beautiful.
sexiest watch that released, in my opinion. Obviously, I know it's gold, and not a lot of people are gonna. That will probably be a very sought after watch. So not a lot of people will have that in the wild, but those are probably the good, successful watches that will release. Obviously, they're the yellow gold and the ever rose gold. Sky Dweller, which I know Brett
Yep,
likes the Sky Dwellers, but again, it's just a lot of gold here, and
yeah. Yeah, and to kind of cap us off and to wrap up the Tudor and the Rolex kind of discussion here, yeah, to that point, really quick, let me just touch on the gold stuff. So, the gold deep sea, I think aesthetically, I think it's a good looking watch. I mean, I like the blue dial, blue bezel config with Rolex, so I think it's aesthetically pleasing. But I can't imagine what that thing feels like on the wrist. And for someone, I know there are people that daily wear a deep sea, or they maybe swap between, that and some other kind of a watch, maybe a dress or maybe a secondary tool watch of some kind. But I just don't see the market, and it's a little silly to me. Similar to the Daytona, it almost feels like the reason behind the releases this year were a little bit geared towards like expanding the clientele from the traditional, like what we traditionally think of a Rolex client, to people that want some more out there options, whether that's the European market, the Middle Eastern market, when you think about countries like, the UAE and cities like Dubai. It could be that. It could be the American market where you're trying to go after, again, someone that traditionally is not aware of how to get their hands on one of these watches at an AD. Think about, you know, tech founders and things like that, or athletes, that again,
oh yeah,
it's not that it's new to those people, but I think maybe just leaning more into it versus, making a bunch of sport models that the traditional clients
that the
would
everyday
would
man
have.
would wear. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, exactly. That's probably the good way to say it. And to go to your point about people that would not consider swapping, or rather looking at a Tudor Coke because the Rolex Coke didn't come out. I think the difference there is the difference between a Rolex collector and a watch enthusiast. Rolex collector, like you said, yeah, they're probably not going to look at Tudor, because if I'm a collector of some really amazing scotch and you say, oh, well, this one tastes just like it, but it's half the bottle, or it's half the cost, then yeah, of course, like, why would I kind of venture that way if I've collected and spent my life and a bunch of
Hmm.
my money on a certain brand? I have that brand loyalty and that affiliation. To me, that's a collector. An enthusiast, I think of myself more on that side, where I look at it and I say, well, it's cheaper, it's got an upgraded movement, it's got a cooler aesthetic to it. I've already got a Black Bay 58, it wears great, I like it. Hey, that's a win for me. Would I have liked to have had the Rolex option? Like, sure, maybe. But again, as just a straight up watch enthusiast, that again, I, kind of categorize myself as, I see it again as a win for me, for the reasons that I just mentioned. So Um, who
Yeah,
knows?
I
You know,
mean,
I
I
don't.
get it. Yeah, this I wanted to point this out too. I understand that too. And if you didn't have your mind set on I want the Rolex coat, then yes,
Hmm.
this is a great alternative. You know, if you just say, hey, I like that color scheme, but I was never going to be able to afford a Rolex coat, then I mean, you're set, baby. This is what to do. You
Yeah,
know, say maybe you had the Seiko version of this, and one day you really wanted a nicer version of a Coke layout, or you had the Monta Coke, and you really wanted to make that next step. Then this is that next step.
yeah,
But there are a lot of people, I think, that when they associate the Coke, they associate it to Rolex. And like you said, why would I want to buy something that I'm probably, going to spend 4 or 5 grand on, and then I might get tired of it in a couple years because it doesn't scratch that itch. We always talk about don't buy watches to, that you want this one, but this one's just like it and a lot less
yeah,
because it's not going to scratch that itch. And so I think there's a lot of people that are, this won't scratch the itch. They might think it will, but at some point they're going to say, damn, I
yeah,
really, what I want to do to just have a coat. What if you buy this watch this year and 2 years from now, Rolex comes out with their new coat?
yeah,
And you're like, son of a, I would have just bought the coat, if I would have known this. And so that, is interesting. Another thing I wanted to point out before we wrap up on this section, um, it's just very interesting to me what Tudor's doing here, and I want them to be careful because I want a lot of people to think about this. I know I pointed this out to you yesterday, Brett, but all our listeners think about this too. Okay, say Tudor keeps going down this path that they're going down where they're just doing a lot of copying of Rolexes, the majority 80% is what they're doing. It's a great time to do that now, and that's why, if you notice, I've said a lot this episode, they're taking advantage of the short-term frenzy. But if we're 7 years down the road and we're in a completely different world market, watch market, and say the Pepsi from 2017 is now worth 6 to 8 grand, where now it's worth 20 something thousand. Say
right,
it's worth 6 to 8 grand, and then the Tudor, all of their lineup at this point is now a Coke, a Pepsi, a knockoff sub, or not knockoff, but a copy of the sub, a copy of the Explorer 2. They're all copies of Rolexes, but those original Rolexes are now worth the same as a new Tudor. Their
yeah,
sales are going to plummet when it comes to that side of things. They're taking advantage of the short term, and that's what I want to make sure Tudor doesn't just do and just hop fully on board of, hey, we're just going to start copying a bunch of these watches, then we'll have one or two that are original that nobody buys, because your sales are going to be great for the next few years, but at some point the world will shift. It always goes back. I mean, a freaking Hulk was worth 4 grand 8 years ago. What
right,
what will it be worth 8 years from now?
yeah,
It's
yeah,
that if that happens again and the Pepsi all of a sudden is worth 4 grand and it's less than 10 years old,
yeah,
I'd be buying a Pepsi. I know Brett would be buying a Pepsi, whether we want to admit it now or not. That's
yeah,
the way we would go. And so, it's just, I want Tudor to be weary. Obviously, I know they're not listening to this podcast, but as a collector, you might be for this now, but I want you to just have an open mind and see, hey, we need Tudor to stand on their own. I get doing a few of these, one or two maybe release of copies a year, if that, but they need to make sure their collection stays, holding on itself.
yeah. Yeah, I think we kind of talked about it being like it's a high risk, high reward play, right? Because to
Yeah.
go back to what we've been saying, these are watches that they're mass appealing and people love. And I think if you categorize yourself more of that enthusiast, I think you look at it and you say, okay, well, this is maybe not the Coke that I expected, but now there is this other great Coke option out on the market and it's a little bit cheaper. But yeah, to your point, if and when those things change, I don't know how it would realistically impact the brands from the consumer perspective. Of course, you would be left holding the bag if you're a Tudor buyer, but that also presumes that you're kind of looking at it as an investment. So I think that as a purchaser, like
Well, I'm not talking about
let's
purchasing it now. I'm talking about down the road. If we're guys, if you buy the Pepsi now, okay, then whatever, you're with it. Maybe you like it, or you buy the Tudor Pepsi. I'm talking about. But
Mhm.
if I'm talking about new sales, when that time comes,
Yeah.
that is what's going to be effective for
Yeah,
the
and then
next
it would
three
steer
years. They're
people to
fine. Yeah,
yeah, because
yeah.
it'll steer people away from a new Tudor into a used Rolex,
Used Rolex, yeah,
assuming that the price gap is extremely
within
minimal.
$1,000 or
Yeah,
two
because
thousand
these Tudors
dollars.
are getting more expensive. I mean, well, I'm not picking on Tudor. Every brand, every
Yeah,
year they see slight increases. So, I don't even know off the top of my head, but I think these Black Bay GMTs and even the Black Bay 58s and 54s now, they're north of like 4,100.
Oh yeah,
I think the
getting 4 to 6
GMTs are,
grand easily now.
yeah, the GMTs are probably mid fours if I just had to guess right now. So, yeah, so that's definitely a possibility, but it'll be interesting to see how it unfolds. I think, I we talked about our last episode. This is our second year covering Watches and Wonders, and so it was going to be fun to see how it unfolded compared to last year. Compared to last year, Rolex just shit the bed. And that's just one man's opinion, but if you're on Watch Twitter, if you're on Watch Instagram, you've seen the memes, and I think
Yeah.
that's a fairly, I feel safe in saying this, a fairly consensus opinion that they shit the bed this year. So because of that, now I am very curious to see what they do throughout the rest of the year. If there are any other discontinuations, if there are any new additions, and then certainly when we get to our third Watches and Wonders a year from now, to see if Rolex are still going down this more upmarket path with rose and solid yellow gold options, veering off of those kind of lower, those kind of lower cost sports models. So cool. Well, with that being said, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. All right, welcome back, everybody. So, we wanted to also talk about a few other watches that stood out to us and kind of caught our attention from this year's Watches and Wonders. So we have a few brands here: Vacheron, Grand Seiko, Cartier, to name a few. But um, I'll also say like this list is a lot shorter than I feel like last year. I think last year there were a lot more memorable models, or maybe there were just more, you know.
Yeah, maybe just what we didn't we hadn't covered so much last year when we did this, so there was
Yeah,
just a
maybe.
lot more excitement. And now, a lot of these watches we've talked about in some sort of variation. So when they come out with a new variation of something we've already talked about, maybe it's just not as exciting. But there are definitely a few of these watches that really grasp the world's attention, I think, and so they're worth pointing out.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think maybe because Rolex had so many gold models, like we talked about the gold models, but we didn't, like at large, we didn't really talk about any specifics. So maybe that's why, because you have this big brand that kind of took themselves almost like out of the picture in a way. So,
Yeah.
but let's go ahead and start with Vacheron since we are releasing that episode tomorrow, or in like 3 hours actually. So let's go ahead and talk about that. Vacheron just released a new variation of the Overseas. So this is an 18 karat rose gold with the Vacheron 5100 movement inside. It is again rose gold, but it looks a little bit more on the yellow gold side than a traditional rose gold. So it's
Yeah.
kind of like right there in between. It's not that like pink kind of faded color of some rose gold. So it's actually really
Yeah.
nice. And yeah, the green I think is like, reminds me of the Masters green, and like that,
Yeah.
just that gold green coloring. It's very
It's
similar
like
to
a
that.
deep emerald
Yep.
green.
Yeah, very fitting. So that's a cool, variation. We saw Tudor do that too with one of the Black Bays this year. They just released, that's the $14,000 Tudor Black Bay.
Yeah.
It's in, I think it's yellow gold. I don't think that's rose gold, but full gold with the yellow, or I'm sorry, with the green dial and bezel. It's 40 grand for a Tudor.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think we've talked about it in the past how it's they had that one John Deere looking watch that came out a few years ago, and this is just a different slight variation of that
Yeah.
watch. So, it's to
There's
whoever buys
such a
one, we'd love reach out to us. We'd love to talk to you
that's a big
because you don't
variation.
really see many of those. Yeah. The next watch we're going to talk about is the manual wind white birch dress, which is again it's a beautiful watch. Really, what else to say about a Grand Seiko? It's just a different version of their white birch, which has taken the world by storm here the last few years, and that watch is. Ooh, it's something that. What do you think about it? I know
Yeah.
you have a really good feeling about this. It really leans more on the matte. I know we talked about it in the Joe Kirk episode where the white birch kind of had like a shinier white birch version, and then a
Yeah.
more of a gray. It's like a gray birch version, and then a really deep snow white birch version. And this definitely leans more on the gray side of things, in my opinion. Do you agree?
Yeah, it's kind of like sheen and no sheen, with
Yeah.
those two models. And yeah, this is technically the third separate white birch model now. So
Yeah.
you now have the two that come on the bracelet, and then this one coming from Grand Seiko on a strap. So that's why we're calling it like the dressy version of this. It's 38.6 millimeter, I believe. That's going to be
Hmm.
smaller than both of the other current offering white birch models, but I know that there is a high beat in one, and then there is a spring drive in the other one. So again, now three. I
Yeah.
think this being with a new caliber, though. I think in this
Yes,
one,
their
yeah,
Evolution 9 style is 80-hour power reserve on this one. So even though it is a
that's
manual
nice.
wine, you definitely get a much bigger power reserve. And then one of the white birch options I know is a 5-day. I believe it's this. Is it the
That's
spring
the
drive or
spring
the high
drive.
beat? Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
So they also have a 5-day version of the white birch. So you're really touching all sides that
Yeah.
you would want to on this white birch. I think they're really diving deep, knowing that hey, this is a hot hand right now. So let's dive into it and give everybody different options when it comes to diameter, watch size being around 38.5 millimeters, and then you have a spring drive version and a high beat version.
Yep. And Joe Kirk and Teddy Baltazar both said that this was their most worn watch of 2023. So it seems to be one of those watches that once people obtain it, it's one of those like kind of sounds like it's going to stick around forever,
Yeah.
and it doesn't do some of like the negative, I think, or it doesn't have some of the negative side effects that some Grand Seiko kind of texture dials and colorful, playful dials do, like the bamboo that I had, for example. The next one that we're going to talk about too is it's another Grand Seiko sports model. This one being, I don't even have even the reference number in front of me, but this one being the red dial GMT that has come out in like it's in one of the anniversary cases. Last year they released basically a very similar version of this, but with the kind of like the ivory colored dial that was textured. So if you're familiar with Grand Seiko, think like the cherry blossom texture. Last year they came out with that in a GMT with a bunch of sub dials. So a chronograph and a GMT. And then this year, a similar model with a red GMT bezel plus a chronograph. It's spring drive, but it's like it's such a complicated and busy watch, and that's kind of becoming the theme for the Grand Seiko sports lineup is they're humongous. If I mean in the GMT sector, you've got bezels that are like overhanging the
Yeah.
models that come on the regular kind of the 5 link oyster style bracelet that Grand Seiko make. Those GMTs with like the fully loomed bezel, they're just the bezel, like I said, it overhangs, and then they're just so loud and busy, and that case
Yeah.
design looks so 80s. Like it's like it's intentionally designed to catch someone's attention in not the best way. And like I hate to say that
Yeah.
about Grand Seiko, but it's just such an odd watch and case style for them to go so doubled down onto.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think we've always talked about the sports watch from Grand Seiko is the one side that lacks the appeal for at least us two. We know of a few people that have, a little cult following for it, but it's just a lot for me. And obviously Brett even likes more intricate dials and a little more out there things. He's bought a few bamboo and different watches that I'm just more of a simple man. So if Brett's thinking this, I'm gonna piggyback right off of it. And
Hmm.
it's definitely out there watch, but I mean, it's par for the course with how out there they make their dress watches that they really hit and are beautiful. They still make the out there diver and sports watches that are just they're not they're out there, but they're not the same.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
whatever the word I'm thinking. But one thing I did want to mention before we move on, the Grand Seiko, the manual wound white birch that we talked about. This is actually the first time in 50 years that they brought a manual wound high beat movement into a new watch. So it
Oh,
is
very
kind of
cool.
remarkable here that did come out on this watch.
Very cool. Very cool. And for the sports model that we're talking about, I just wanted to clarify that's the Grand Seiko SBGC 275. And again, this is a chronograph. And the last thing I was going to say about this is Like the whole power reserve indicator from Grand Seiko, I get that that is at this point it's almost part of their like design DNA and language, but
Hmm.
I mean, you have this watch with this case design, and anyone that knows this watch that we're talking about, why would you continue to stick the power reserve indicator on a dial with a chronograph set of subdials, these really really chunky second and hour hands, and then also have the Grand Seiko logo and branding off center at the top of the dial? It's such a weird thing from Grand Seiko, but that's the last thing I'm going to say about it.
Yeah.
Besides that, though, let's get into some other brands, some brands that we haven't touched on as lately here on the podcast. The Cartier Santos got
Yeah.
a updated model. They got a dual time, so effectively a GMT for the Santos. Hey, it only makes sense. That's the arguably the oldest and first pilot's watch ever created. So
Yeah.
very cool to see that with a dual time GMT function. They don't leave that Cartier Santos DNA or design language, so it's still the same case shape and dial shape and everything. So they've just put that into a sub dial, which is really cool. So think like Rolex Sky Dweller, for example. So moving the 24-hour secondary time zone there. It's cool. I like that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's good to see a little variation when it comes to the Cartier watch collection. We talked about in our episode. It's a beautiful watch collection, very popular. I think it's the second most popular watch brand out there behind
Yeah.
Rolex. I mean, there's definitely a discrepancy there, but it's good to see them switch it up a little bit and get a GMT function to, like you said, one of the oldest pilot watches out there in the world. So just very notable. I would talk about the next watch because I know we're kind of alternating here, but I know this is Brett's kind of baby and one of his favorite watches out in the market today. So I'll go ahead and hand it back off to him to talk about the Tag Heuer gray glass box on the bracelet.
Yeah. Tag came out with another. So this marks the third. I think this is the third, maybe the fourth glass box. But yeah, pretty simple here. They're coming out with this on a bracelet for the first time. I bought my wife a Tag Heuer Carrera that came on a bracelet, and I can say the bracelet is nice. It's from a machining perspective and from a manufacturing perspective, it feels very nice in the hands. Although I don't love the way that it looks. It looks a lot cheaper than what it feels. And there's a lot of brands that do the opposite of that. Grand Seiko, for example, that 5 link oyster style bracelet, it looks a lot better than what it feels and what it functions like. And I feel the
Yeah.
opposite for Tag. I think that you get a really nice, good feeling package like in the metal, but some aesthetic updates, maybe to add some additional polishing and brushing design or something like that would do it some good. But in terms of this one, the dial is really cool. It's very, I thought like 90s at first. It's silver
Yeah.
dial with black subdials and then red hands. So it's very like kind of classic racing colors and classic Tag for that reason to me. So
Yeah.
very cool.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's definitely one of my favorite tags that came out in the past probably 3 to 4 years. So I volley off of everything that Brett said there, and Glassbox is a very popular model out in the world today, and I mean, they just hit it out of the park again here.
To throw something else in there, I just wanted to give
Mm.
an honorable mention to the IWC Portugueser Eternal Calendar. We have that up
Ooh, yeah,
on our
yeah, forgot
Instagram,
about that.
depending on when you listen to this. But
Yeah,
very cool watch. They claim that the perpetual calendar complication will be correct for 400 years, along with a moon phase complication that will only deviate by a single day for the next 45 million years. So very impressive claims. I mean, we saw some perpetual calendar, or I'm sorry, perpetual tourbillon complete calendars by Alanga. This IWC Portugueser Eternal Calendar, some very cool stuff in the name of kind of grand complications, and JLC as well was in the mix. So just an honorable mention for anyone that is considering or asking, what about the complications?
And to wrap up the episode, we'll go ahead and get out of here after this one. We'll talk about, I just wanted to mention briefly the Patek Aquanaut reference number 51646 travel time in white gold. This is a beautiful baby blue, ocean blue, kind of gray blue dial here that really took the world by storm. It's on Teddy's Instagram if anybody wanted to go see it. But it actually has their in-house 26330 movement, and it supports 2 time zones, of course, being their travel time watch. So this is another watch that, it's just what are we gonna say? It's another Patek Aquanaut, Nautilus. I mean, those are just, they hit them out of the park. They're beautiful watches to me personally. I know people might say, hey, I'm more of an AP guy for the Royal Oak, but to me, the Aquanauts and the Nautilus, those are just quintessential, just luxury watches. I actually saw one about a month ago out in the wild, and it was a smaller version. I think it was their 36 38 millimeter version, but I mean, even still, it just knocks your socks off when you see them.
Yeah. I've never really handled a Patek, either Aquanaut or Nautilus in person. So I'm still waiting to do that, but I love how beautiful they look. And I think that's a very common take on Patek versus AP, is that AP looks a lot more industrious, a lot more, just kind of like rough around the edges, like quite literally. And then Patek being so soft and so rounded. I talked about that with like the Monta Noble, and not to put Monta and Patek in the same atmosphere there, or put them in the same category. It's a better way of saying that. But I think similar when you look at the case design and all that. And yeah, this one is very, very nice too. It's 63K though, and for an Aquanaut, I mean, it's not like you could probably get those from the AD anyway, but that's like a $20,000, just a steel sports watch on the very high end of sports watches for the base kind of level Aquanaut. So it's quite a jump to go up. I mean, I know it's white gold and everything, but yeah, I mean, what would you do there? Would you do 40K for like a white gold Rolex sub, or would you do let's just call it 65K for a Patek in white gold? But
Well,
I mean,
that's the all time question for a lot of guys. It really depends on the person. Even there, and because we can take this back a little bit. I was talking to somebody that was going through that same exact thought process. Other than it wasn't a Patek, it was actually an AP. He's like, hey, do I spend 40K on a stainless AP Royal Oak, or do I spend 40K on a gold Day President? And he was like, man, he's like, as bad as it sounds, he's like, man, I just love the feeling of having a Rolex. And he's like, I know if I walk into a room, people know I take Rolex. People don't know an AP, and having that conversation. And I was like, yeah, I mean, it really depends on that. He's like, most 90% of the people in the world won't know what that is. Same thing with the Patek. When I saw the Patek about a month ago, I promise you, nobody else in that group of people that were talking had any idea what that CEO had on. And so, it really depends on the person, but I think personally, if I had the money for both, I would go the Patek route, just because, I mean, that's your Grail of all Grail brands. But if you're somebody that says, hey, I like the status that comes with watches, and whether anybody wants to admit it or not, we all have a little bit of that in us. You might say, hey, everybody knows what a Rolex is, and having a solid gold watch, I mean, or a yellow gold that really flashes more, versus a white gold that, if anybody's walking by, that's why I've never been a huge fan of white gold, because it's just like, man, why am I spending all this extra money for something that looks the same as a stainless? And unless you put it on, you would never know.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that take right there. The cost difference for, like you said, I know that it's gold because I can feel the weight on it, but
Yeah.
outside of that, I mean, that's hard to justify. But
Yeah.
again, like, I'm not making $60,000 watch decisions.
Yeah.
I mean, to that story from earlier, I don't know if I agree with that. I mean, if I had the chance to get an AP, or let's say like a Royal Oak, and then you got an Aquanaut / a Nautilus, whichever one of those routes that you want to take at Patek, and then day date, a gold sub, a gold Sky Dweller, something like that. Very tough to get watches on the higher end of the price point for just a sports watch there. Man, it would be tough to pass up the opportunity to get an AP. I don't care if people know
Yeah.
about it or not, because if
Oh, yeah.
someone didn't know about it, and if I was really that into people knowing about what was on my wrist,
Yeah.
I would just say, just Google it.
Google it.
and
And that's
the next time I run into you,
yeah.
you'll think, Rolex ain't that
Damn.
special, is it? Oh, this
Yeah.
guy, oh, you got a
And that's
Rolex? Oh, this
exactly what
guy, I
I
know they've
thought.
got an
Yeah.
AP. you
Yeah.
know,
That's exactly what I thought. I was on the. He ended up actually buying. Just spoiler alert. He ended up actually buying the president, but I was on the side of saying, "Hey, I like the AP. I would be going to
yeah.
AP personally." So I wholesaleheartedly agree.
I don't think you can go wrong with either one of those options,
No, no,
but if your
and I've seen it before, and
justification,
it's beautiful. I mean,
yeah,
it's a white dial, Roman numeral, date president, yellow. I mean, it's just a
yeah,
stunning
that
watch.
is nice.
But it is, it's just it's a decision that you have to make when you can find an AP online
Yeah,
somewhere for right around the same price. And
yeah,
but yeah,
yeah, yeah. Like I said, I think both are great options. Yeah, yeah. Well, and yeah, I mean, I think thinking about this one, like I said, it's 63K. I mean, who knows? That's I don't like that as just to kind of wrap us up, and we'll get on out of here. I don't like that as a consumer because it does at least just call into question like at what point do we run out of the price ceiling? If this is supposed to be the entry level, steel watch from Patek. Look, I know Patek is not an everyman brand, but like we can still dream about like the $20,000, the $25,000 Aquanaut, and brands start making 63K. Rolex starts making nothing but gold watches all of a sudden. It does, at least in my mind, bring into question from that consumer of if these are aspirational pieces, whether you've purchased one or two Rolexes and you're thinking
yeah,
about your third, or whether you've got a Tudor and a Speedmaster right now and you're thinking about your first Rolex ever, or you're like your friend from that
yeah,
story, you're thinking about your first Holy Trinity,
yeah.
Patek and AP or something like that. Just in those instances, that consumer that's seriously looking and approaching these brands, it is scary to
Hmm.
think that that the low end models are going to be pushing closer to 100K than 25K. So not a problem for me to worry about, unfortunately, or actually
Yeah,
fortunately for me. Yeah, I
one
don't
day.
have that's a
Yeah,
too rich problem for me, but just a
yeah,
thought there.
yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, any other watches or any other takes, anything from Watches and Wonders?
I mean, I think that, like we said, that really wraps it up. I think we really dug deep into the Tudor and the Rolex comparisons, and Grand Seiko as always. I feel like Grand Seiko a lot of the times their watches and wonders. I mean, they're big, but they're not as big as maybe some other brands because Grand Seiko just comes out with so many different watches throughout the
Yeah.
year. They come out with so many limited editions to the chagrin of some people. But they do come out with so many limited editions throughout the year that it maybe makes this one time a year thing a little less special. And there's definitely some other watches that will be coming out fairly soon, and we'll talk about probably in our next few episodes, especially when it comes to the Manta, teasing some sort of different Ocean King, we believe. So we'd love
Yep.
to see what's coming out there, and we'll maybe even down the road get the two owners of Manta back on here and discuss some because a lot of new watches have came out since they were here just a little over a year ago.
Yeah, actually a lot. Yeah, they've brought back some older models. They've brought out some new colors. So yeah, we should definitely do that. Awesome, man. Well, great to do this again this year. It was
Yeah,
really fun to see all of these. I agree with your Grand Seiko take. I agree with a lot of the takes from this episode. I think it'll be interesting to see what Rolex does in the future. It'll be interesting also to see what position Tudor takes in the
yeah,
future. Because at this point it looks like there's no rhyme or reason as to how and where those two brands are looking back in the archives for Tudor to bring to life, an old
yeah,
watch from one of the two. So again, that's why I say it'll be interesting to see the direction that Tudor take. Maybe it'll be a newer, and by newer I mean 80s, 90s Rolex or Tudor reference. Probably not Tudor, but probably Rolex reference. So that whole story playing out. Yeah, Grand Seiko and their just slew of releases every year. And then
just par
yeah,
for the course.
yeah, exactly. And then yeah, next year, of course, we'll have a couple of these under our belt, and yeah, even more to cover. So thanks everybody. Hope that you enjoyed the episode. Also, don't forget that there is a episode coming out today as well on Vacheron, kind of a regularly scheduled episode. not in
Yeah.
addition to this.
Very proud of that episode. That's a great episode. If you haven't checked that out already, definitely go do it. And if you have,
Yep.
then just DM us, let us know what you think about it, because that was a really fun episode to do. And we're doing a few of these newer formatted episodes, and then we're also covering some brands that maybe we've pushed off, but we're saying, hey, we're refinding the love for the podcast, so we want to do some brands that we're actually passionate about, not talk about. Not to jab at anybody, but Bulova,
Yeah.
or is it, we want to talk about things that people want to listen to. So definitely keep reaching out to us. Let us know if you have any recommendations. We're still building out a schedule as we go into the fall, or into the summer and into the fall. So if you have anything, definitely reach out to us and let us know, and we'll try to throw it on there.
Yeah.
Appreciate it, guys.
And on that note, I like the idea of looking maybe down market. I know we've talked about some big brands lately, some Holy Trinity brands, AP, Vacheron, Watches and Wonders here, a lot of gold watches, a lot of expensive stuff. So yeah, maybe I like the idea of like, sub $1,000, sub $2,000 watches, and then maybe jump back into something else.
Yeah, because our next episode will be a specialized video like that. So be on the lookout for that, and it'll come out here. And I guess that'll be the first episode in May. So May 7th, I think, is the first Monday.
May the 6th, actually. It'll be my
May
birthday.
the 6th, yeah. May the 6th be the first, and that'll be a little birthday episode. So we'll see what we have going there.
Yeah. We'll catch you guys then.